The silence before a storm is the loudest sound in the world. You ever sit in an arena or even just on your couch, alone, lights down, headphones on and feel it? That specific electricity that builds in the seconds before something that you somehow know, deep in your bones, is about to change everything? Before the music hits. Before the pyro. Before the first syllable lands. You just feel it. Like pressure dropping before the sky splits open. That is exactly what the entire wrestling world felt this past week. And now the storm has a name. Actually, it has two names. What is going on, Wrestling Apocalypse Nation? Welcome back. I am your host, and if you clicked on this video, then you already saw the headline, you already felt your heart rate jump, and you are sitting there right now with one burning question rattling around in your skull: is this real? Is this actually, genuinely, historically real? Because the words on that screen, Oba Femi accepts Brock Lesnar to Wrestlemania 42, no rules match, do not feel like something that should exist in the same universe as the rest of our lives right now. They feel like something out of a fever dream. They feel like the answer to a prayer that the most hardcore wrestling fans have been whispering quietly for the last 2 years, afraid to say it out loud in case saying it out loud made it disappear. And yet, here we are. Buckle up, because we are going deep today. We are going all the way in. We are talking about the rise of a generational talent. We are talking about the return, and I want you to feel the weight of that word, the return of the most physically dominant human being professional wrestling has ever seen. We are talking about a challenge that was issued with the kind of cold, breathtaking arrogance that only the truly dangerous can pull off without being laughed out of the building. We are talking about a stipulation, no rules, that strips away every safety net, every referee's mercy, every protection that a wrestling ring normally provides, and turns WrestleMania 42 into something that is less of a match and more of a reckoning. Let's start at the beginning. Because if you want to understand why this challenge hit the wrestling world like a thunderbolt, you have to understand who Oba Femi is. Not just the highlight reel. Not just the clips that keep going viral. You have to understand the story. Because in professional wrestling, the story is everything. Oba Femi arrived in this industry without apology. That is the only way I know how to describe it. Most rising stars, even the most gifted ones, arrive with a certain humility, a certain prove-yourself energy that is almost instinctive. You come in, you put your head down, you earn your respect match by match and promo by promo, and slowly, painfully, you build your name into something that means something. That is the traditional path. That is the road most traveled. Oba Femi looked at that road and he walked straight through the middle of it without slowing down. From the first moment this man stepped under the bright lights on a main stage, there was something operating behind his eyes that was different. A stillness that didn't read as calm, it read as certainty, the kind of certainty that isn't cockiness, because cockiness implies you have something to prove. Oba Femi has never looked like a man who believes he has anything to prove. He looks like a man who arrived already knowing the verdict of every competition he would ever enter, and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to what he already understood about himself. Physically, let's be honest, this man is an engineering problem. He is the kind of athlete that makes other professional wrestlers, who are themselves physical specimens that regular human beings cannot fathom, stop and quietly reassess their place in the food chain. He is fast in a way that a man his size has no business being fast. His strength is not gym-manufactured vanity muscle, it is structural. It is the kind of strength that has leverage and technique and timing behind it, which makes it exponentially more dangerous than raw power alone. When Oba Femi hits something, it stays hit. When he lifts someone, the physics of it looks wrong, like gravity is making an exception for him specifically. But here is what separates him from every other physically gifted giant who has come through this industry in the last decade. Oba Femi can talk, not just string words together. Not just remember his bullet points. The man can talk in the way that builds mythologies. He speaks like someone who has studied the history of this industry, absorbed every great promo ever cut, and then discarded all of it in favor of something entirely his own. His cadence is unhurried. His vocabulary is weaponized. Every word lands with the deliberateness of a chess move, because every word is a chess move. He doesn't try to make you hate him. He simply presents you with his worldview, which is that he is without peer, and then dares you to disagree with evidence. And every time someone tries to disagree with evidence, he destroys the evidence. So that is who issued the challenge. That is who stood in the center of that ring and said the words that are currently breaking the internet in half. Now let's talk about how it happened, because the delivery, the theater of this moment is as important as the content of it. The segment began, and I want to paint this picture for you because if you were not watching live, you need to understand what the room felt like. Oba Femi's music hit, and this crowd, which had already been through a wild night, a crowd that had already given everything they had, this crowd stood, not universally, because Oba Femi has never been a man who inspired universal adoration, but the standing was not just appreciation. It was the way you stand when something enters a room that commands a physical response from you before your brain has processed what it is. Your body just reacts. You stand because something in your lizard brain tells you that you are in the presence of something significant, and your posture should reflect that. He walked to that ring slowly. And I mean slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Like Wrestlemania was not a deadline but a destination he would arrive at on his own schedule regardless of what the calendar said. He stepped through the ropes, and I've watched this moment back probably 15 times now. There was a half-second pause where he stood in the center of the ring and simply looked out at the crowd. No expression. No acknowledgement. Just a surveillance. Like he was making an assessment and finding the building acceptable. He took the microphone. And then silence. He let it breathe for an uncomfortably long time. Long enough that you could hear individual voices from the crowd. Long enough that the energy in the building tipped from anticipation into something almost like anxiety. And then, in that low, measured, absolutely unshakable voice of his, Oba Femi said something that I want to give you almost verbatim because the construction of it was too precise to paraphrase. He said, "I have spent my entire life being told to wait. Wait your turn. Earn your moment. Respect the history. I have respected the history. I have studied the history. And I have concluded with full confidence and zero apology that the history has been waiting for me." The arena did not know what to do with that. There was a smattering of boos. There was an equally surprised wave of cheering from people who could not help themselves. Most of the building just absorbed it the way you absorb a punch you didn't see coming, with a slight rocking back on your heels and a reassessment of the situation. And then he said the name. He said, Brock Lesnar. 2 words. He let them hang in the air like smoke. And then he said, "I am not sending a message through the television. I am not cutting a promo for the internet. I am speaking directly to the only man on this planet who might be able to give me something I have not yet experienced in this industry." Which is consequence. He paused again. The crowd was a held breath. WrestleMania 42. No disqualifications. No countouts. No referees making decisions that neither of us would have made for ourselves. No rules. You and I, in the center of this ring, until one of us cannot continue. Because I do not want to beat Brock Lesnar. I want to end the conversation about whether a man like Brock Lesnar belongs in the same discussion as a man like me. And then he put the microphone down. Gently. The way you set down something that has served its purpose. And he left. I want to take a moment to just let that land. Because what Oba Femi did in that segment was not just cut a good promo. He did something much more sophisticated. He issued a challenge that reframes the entire narrative around Brock Lesnar, and he did it by treating Lesnar not as a legend to be revered, but as a thesis to be disproven. He didn't say, "I want to beat the greatest of all time." He said, "I want to determine whether the label even applies." That is a different kind of disrespect. That is the disrespect of an academic, not a brawler. And it is 10 times more provocative because Brock Lesnar has never encountered it before. Now, let's talk about the other side of this coin. Let's talk about Brock Lesnar. Because whatever you think of him, whatever your personal feelings are about his legacy, his career trajectory, his relationship with this industry, you cannot have this conversation honestly without confronting the sheer, staggering scale of what Brock Lesnar represents. Brock Lesnar is not a wrestler who became famous. Brock Lesnar is a force of nature that the wrestling industry was lucky enough to capture for extended periods of time and call its own. The man was a legitimate NCAA Division I heavyweight champion. He competed at the highest levels of combat sport outside of wrestling with results that most professional fighters spend entire careers and never come close to. He holds a record in the UFC that would be considered elite for any fighter, let alone a man who came to MMA as a secondary athletic pursuit. He has held the most prestigious championship in professional wrestling more times than most people have attempted to win it. He ended a legendary streak at the showcase of the Immortals that the entire industry had built into an untouchable wall of certainty for over 2 decades, and he ended it on what was supposed to be the night of his opponent's coronation, in a result so shocking that the crowd fell into a confused, grieving silence that lasted for the rest of the evening. Brock Lesnar is not a character. Brock Lesnar is a verdict that the wrestling industry has to reckon with every time he walks back through the door. And he has been away. However long it has been, and I know the timeline has been complicated for reasons that are not relevant to today's story, the absence of Brock Lesnar from the wrestling landscape creates a specific kind of void. not an emotional void, a gravitational void, the kind of absence that rearranges the physics of everything around it. Without the constant reminder that this specific predator exists in the ecosystem, other predators begin to expand, to fill space, to declare themselves the apex, which is exactly what Oba Femi has been doing, correctly and brilliantly, by the way. He has operated in a landscape where the Brock Lesnar variable was removed from the equation, and he has dominated that landscape accordingly. But now the variable is back, or at least the possibility of the variable is back. And Oba Femi's challenge has functioned, brilliantly, as a way of forcing the issue. By naming Lesnar publicly, in that ring, in those terms, he has created a situation where any response including silence becomes part of the story. If Brock accepts, we get the match the wrestling world did not know it needed until 3 days ago, and now cannot stop thinking about. If Brock doesn't respond, Oba Femi gets to spend the next several months framing that silence as confirmation of everything he said. It is a rhetorical checkmate that could only be executed by someone who had thought through every possible branch of the decision tree before opening his mouth. Now, our sources here at Wrestling Apocalypse, and I want to be careful here, because I will not report anything I cannot stand behind. Our sources are telling us that the reaction internally, backstage, to this challenge was described as electric. That is a direct word from someone who was in that building last night. Electric. Not concerned. Not cautious. Electric, which tells you something about the way this is being received at every level of this industry. People who have been around long enough to be cynical about everything stopped being cynical for a moment when Oba Femi put that microphone down. That is not a small thing. We are also hearing whispers, and I want to emphasize the word whispers here. This is not confirmed. This is the kind of thing that lives in the spaces between what is known and what is felt. We are hearing whispers that the stipulation choice was not accidental, that no rules was not just the most dramatic option available, but a specific message directed specifically at Brock Lesnar. Because if you study Lesnar's career and Oba Femi clearly has, you understand that Brock Lesnar's greatest weapon is not his power, and it is not his suplexes, and it is not the F5. His greatest weapon is the threat of all of those things. The psychological weight of knowing that the man across the ring from you has done what he has done and is capable of what he is capable of. That threat operates within the structure of a professional wrestling match in a very specific way. It is modulated by rules, by referee intervention, by the constant subtext that there is an institution here that will prevent things from going too far. Remove that structure. Remove the rules. Remove the safety net. And suddenly Brock Lesnar's greatest weapon is neutralized, because it no longer functions as a threat. In a no-rules environment, both men are equally unprotected. And Oba Femi, by choosing that stipulation, is essentially saying, I am not afraid of what you are capable of. I am more afraid of what I might hold back in a match with rules. Let's find out what happens when neither of us holds back. That is not bravado. That is not trash talk. That is a young lion walking into the territory of the most dangerous animal in the wilderness and saying, come and test me on neutral ground. And the terrifying thing, the thing that makes this a story worth obsessing over, is that it does not feel reckless. It feels earned, because let's talk about Oba Femi's recent form, because context matters and the timing of this challenge is not random. This man has been on a run. Not just a hot streak, not just a purple patch of momentum, a statement-making demolition tour of the roster that has left no room for debate about where he stands in the current pecking order. Match after match, opponent after opponent, he has not just won, he has made the act of winning look inevitable from the first lockup. He has absorbed shots from opponents who hit hard and looked mildly inconvenienced. He has delivered offense that has had the commentary team struggling to find new adjectives because the old ones keep feeling insufficient. There was a match, and those of you who saw it live know exactly which match I'm talking about, where Oba Femi was in a situation that would have ended the momentum of 90% of the roster. He was down. The crowd was starting to believe. And then something shifted in his expression. Not rage. Not desperation. It was almost like boredom, like he had allowed the match to be interesting for long enough and had decided it was time to conclude it. And then he did. Conclusively. In a way that was so emphatic that the crowd applauded it even though they were rooting against him, because sometimes athletic greatness simply demands acknowledgement regardless of allegiance. That is the version of Oba Femi who just called out Brock Lesnar. A man in the fullest flower of his ability, at the peak of his confidence, in the best form of his career. And he looked at all of that momentum, all of that heat, all of that carefully constructed ascent, and he threw it into the highest stakes fire available to him, because he believes the fire will not burn him. He believes the fire will illuminate him. Now I want to take a moment to do something that I think is important, because this community deserves the honest, complicated analysis and not just the excitement spiral. I want to make the case for why this is a legitimately terrifying situation for Oba Femi, because I think the excitement of the challenge has maybe obscured the scale of what he is asking for. No rules. Think about what that means when the other man in the ring is Brock Lesnar. In a standard match, there is a rhythm. There are sequences. There are referee interventions that create momentary resets, that give both competitors brief windows to breathe and recalibrate. The structure of a wrestling match, paradoxically, is what allows for the most spectacular individual moments because the structure creates context, creates contrast, creates the valleys that make the peaks meaningful. Brock Lesnar, for all of his physical devastation, has competed within that structure his entire career. He has operated within a framework that, however violent it gets, still has edges and boundaries. No rules has no edges. No rules is an open field at midnight, and it belongs to whoever is willing to go the furthest. And the question, the genuinely terrifying, honest question that Oba Femi has to sit with between now and WrestleMania 42 is not whether he is good enough to beat Brock Lesnar. We can make compelling arguments on both sides of that. The question is whether anyone born in this era, in this generation, has the stomach for the specific kind of war that Brock Lesnar fights when there are no rules to stop him. Because we have seen that version of Lesnar. We have seen what happens when Brock decides that a match is a fight and a fight has no limits. The history is documented. The consequences are on the record. And those consequences were visited upon men who were themselves monsters of the sport, men with their own unimpeachable credentials and their own claims to greatness. Brock did not care about the credentials. Brock has never cared about the credentials. Brock cares about one thing, in one language, and that is the language of physics. Massachusetts velocity. Impact. If he hits you hard enough, your credentials become irrelevant. So, we have an irresistible force. And we have what might be an immovable object. And we have the single most permissive, most dangerous stipulation that professional wrestling offers as their arena. And we have WrestleMania 42, the grandest stage this industry has ever built, the event that has housed the greatest moments and the greatest matches in the history of the art form as the venue. I have been covering this industry for a long time. I have seen big matches. I have seen career-defining moments. I have been in this chair for things that I thought, at the time, were the most significant storyline developments I would ever report on. And I want to tell you, with full sincerity, that this one feels different. Not because of the names, though the names alone would be enough. It feels different because of the timing. Oba Femi at this exact moment in his career, Brock Lesnar at this exact stage of his, WrestleMania 42 on the horizon, and a stipulation that guarantees the match will not just be a contest but a statement that will be referenced for the next 20 years of this industry regardless of who wins. And that is the thing that I keep coming back to, regardless of who wins. Because both outcomes are seismic. Both outcomes permanently alter the landscape. If Brock Lesnar comes back, accepts this challenge, stands across the ring from a man a generation younger than him who has just spent months declaring his era officially arrived and then beats him in a no-rules match, with no structure to hide behind, it does not just re-establish Lesnar's dominance. It makes a specific, devastating argument that the new era is not ready yet. That the throne has not actually changed hands, it was just temporarily unoccupied. That is a statement with real consequences for every young star trying to climb this mountain. But if Oba Femi wins, if this young lion stands over the Beast Incarnate at WrestleMania 42, in a no-rules match, after everything that Brock can throw at him, then the era is not just new. The era is declared, officially, irrevocably, on the biggest stage available. And Oba Femi does not just become the next great champion. He becomes the man who closed a chapter of wrestling history that many people believed would never fully close, because some chapters feel too large to end. That is what is at stake. That is why this story matters beyond the match itself, beyond the spectacle, beyond the highlights and the viral clips and the social media debate. The result of Oba Femi versus Brock Lesnar in a no-rules match at WrestleMania 42 will be a reference point. One of those results in wrestling history that you use as a dividing line. You talk about what came before it and what came after it, because the landscape was genuinely different on either side. And we are standing at the edge of it right now. We are in the before. The question that this community has to wrestle with, pun absolutely intended, is this: do you believe? Do you believe that Oba Femi has not just the talent, not just the physicality, not just the technical ability, but the will, the deep, non-negotiable, cannot be suppressed will to walk into the most dangerous match of his career, against the most legitimately dangerous competitor this industry has ever produced, in a stipulation that removes every safety net, and come out the other side still standing? Because I have watched him, and I have watched the way he moves, and the way he speaks, and the way he looks at a challenge not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And I will tell you, honestly, sitting in this chair, I believe him. I do not know if he wins. That is a different question, and a harder one, but I believe that Oba Femi genuinely, categorically believes that he is going to win. And there is a version of reality in which that belief is itself the deciding variable. The legends of this industry have always been separated from the merely talented by exactly that quality: the refusal to accept the script that says someone else is the hero of this story. Oba Femi has torn up that script. He walked into the center of that ring, looked into the camera, called out the most physically dominant force in the history of professional wrestling, and offered to settle the question without rules, without protection, without any version of mercy from either direction. That is either the boldest move in the history of this particular era of wrestling, or it is a catastrophic miscalculation that we will be discussing for the wrong reasons. We do not know which one yet, and that is why Wrestlemania 42 just became the most important date on the wrestling calendar. That is why this community is going to spend the next weeks and months breaking down every development, every training update, every word Brock Lesnar either says or conspicuously does not say, every Oba Femi promo that tries to sustain this extraordinary level of intensity. And we are going to be here, every step of the way, bringing you the most complete, most passionate, most honest analysis available anywhere. Because this is not just a wrestling match. This is a question that this industry has been building to without fully knowing it. The question of what happens when the unstoppable new force demands to be tested by the immovable old standard, in a setting where nothing holds either of them back, on the biggest stage the world has. We are about to find out the answer. And I am so grateful, genuinely, deeply grateful to share this moment with this community. Because this is why we do this. This is why we stay up too late watching shows and rewatching segments and arguing in the comments and building our theories and tracking our sources and pouring our hearts into covering this wild, beautiful, ridiculous, magnificent industry. For exactly this. For the moment when wrestling stops being entertainment and becomes something that feels like it genuinely matters. Like the result will mean something. Like the story is real. This story feels real. So I want to hear from you right now. Down in those comments, I need your take. Is Oba Femi ready for Brock Lesnar? Does the no-rules stipulation help him or hurt him? And most importantly, who wins at WrestleMania 42? Give me your prediction, give me your reasoning, give me your wildest theory, because this is the conversation that deserves every voice this community has. If this video lit a fire in you the way this story lit a fire in us, and I can tell from the fact that you are still here, 12 minutes deep into this breakdown, that it did hit the like button. It is the single fastest way to tell us that this kind of deep, cinematic, passionate analysis is what you want more of, and it helps us reach the fans who haven't found this community yet but need to be here for exactly this kind of moment. Subscribe to Wrestling Apocalypse and ring that notification bell, because the next few months are going to move fast. Brock's response could come any day now. Every SmackDown, every Raw, every press conference and every cryptic social media post is going to be loaded with meaning, and you do not want to be the person catching up after the fact. Be here. Be ready. Be loud. The Apocalypse is a no-rules match, and it is scheduled for WrestleMania 42. I've been your host. Watch your back. Stay loud. We'll see you at the next bell.